Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Echoes of Redemption, a podcast of Redemption City Church. My name is Sebastian. I'm the host of our podcast, and I'm so glad to be back. And this time, we're going to have a really special guest. I know that we always say that, but this time, this special guest and I will have a really, really awesome conversation. And so stay tuned. Thank you for being here. Let's get it going. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, we have a special guest, and you are a special guest.
Oh,
and I'm just thinking
you.
For everyone that's going to come across this video, it could be some of our friends, some of our members of the church, or even some random people, right? And so some people might know you because they've seen you around our church. Maybe they've talked to you. Maybe they're your friends, but some might not. And so I would like to just open it up for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sebastian, for having me on. My name is Jamie Bartlett. I am a West Michigan native. I grew up in Sparta. For those not familiar with the area, that's about a half an hour north of where we sit right here. I went to Grand Valley after high school and imagined that I would settle here and be here for the rest of my life. But I did have some experiences in college that just led me on a very different trajectory. I grew up going to church, but I had zero interest in God, the gospel,
in
any of it. I saw it all as just, as a lot of us have said, just a list of rules and no desire to follow in my parents' footsteps who were Christians. Saw it as just a lot of legalism and zero interest. But God really got a hold of my heart when I was a junior in college. I was engaged at the time and I was living with my fiance on the west side of Grand Rapids. And then I found out I had cervical cancer. And that was, I think, where the bottom fell out a little bit, of just recognizing I didn't have control over my life as much as I liked to believe. And that really was unsettling, and I spiraled pretty hard. After that, I just didn't have any handlebars to hold on to when hard things happen. No, there was nothing going on under the surface of my life. And so there was nothing to stabilize me. And I recognized that. And my fiance and I broke up. I moved back in with my parents, and I started going to church and hearing a lot about grace and God's mercy and forgiveness. And it was a balm to my soul in so many ways. I ended up having some procedures done for the cancer that I had. And some people are familiar with the story. I've shared it before, but I was waiting and I was really nervous just about the procedure. And a nurse grabbed my hand and she's like, "I'll be right here with you the whole time." And she sang "Great is Thy Faithfulness," like throughout the whole thing. And I just sat there and sobbed. And I was like, "God, you see me like in this moment, in this very delicate moment. And I'm known by you." And that was it for me. I was like, okay.
Man.
I surrender. Yes. And so that really was, I think, the beginning of just my redemption. It still took me, obviously, I'm still working it out, and aren't we all, right? But that was when it's all the gears started clicking for me of like, okay, my life is for God. It's not for me. It's not for my own, to build my own kingdom. It's for God's. And so I got baptized just a few months after that. And then I finished college, graduated. In that time frame, I went to like a Christian conference. It's called New Attitude. It doesn't exist anymore. But
I was going to say, I've never heard of it.
It was the whole, Josh Harris, like I Kissed Dating Goodbye. There was a conference, right? So I go from like living with my fiance to like then being introduced to Christian culture. And to me, it was super refreshing. Because I came from a like, you do whatever.
The opposite.
Opposite, and so many toxic relationships and unhealthy relationships. And so I was in all of that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this content is amazing. I know other people have a very opposite reaction of it.
Some opinions there,
right.
yeah.
Some very strong opinions. For me, it was a grace to see just how different Christians approached relationships than the way that the secular world approaches it. And so I went down deep into that. I was like, all right. And even the mentor that I had at the time, she was like, Jamie, I challenge you to not date anyone for 6 months. And I was like, are you joking? I haven't gone 6 months without a boyfriend since 5th grade. Yeah. So this is going to be really hard for me, but I could see that it had been part of my identity of I am only a whole person if I am with somebody else. And so that I had to unlearn a lot of things. And so that whole world of I Kiss Dating Goodbye and all of that was super helpful to me to rebuild, tear down what I had grown up believing and then rebuild. And so in that, I met a group of friends that lived in Philadelphia. So after I graduated high school, I was like, I need to get out of Grand Rapids. Yeah. I'm like, hey,
run away.
I'm gonna run away from my past and I'm just gonna get out of here. And so I ended up visiting them a couple times in Philadelphia and thinking, what should I do next after I graduate college? My degree was in social work. And a couple said, why don't you just look at some schools around here for grad school? And I was like, that's okay. When you don't know what to do, you go to grad school.
You keep going.
You just keep going. And so I looked and I ended up really loving this one seminary that I visited. It was a really small but tight-knit community. And right away I was like, I like this a lot. And they had a counseling program. And so I was like, okay,
this is it,
I want to do a deep dive into my own heart and into my own issues and trauma and past. And so let's go for counseling. Yeah. Because I figured it would be a way to internally work out some of my issues. And so they had student housing. So I ended up moving into that. There was space for like 12 girls, 12 guys. And then they had some married couples apartments. Yeah. And so I moved into that. So I graduated in May of, 2003 from Grand Valley, and then moved into there in August. So a few months after I graduated. Yeah. Yep. And right when I moved in, I heard all about this guy named Mike.
Dun, dun.
Right. Everyone that was in the student housing, I love to connect. I'm a relational person. I knew I'm in a new area. I need friends. So I am totally fine just meeting everybody and talking. And it was a reoccurring theme. We can't wait till you meet Mike. And as Mike and I have talked about this a lot of the student housing was filled with international students, mostly, from different ethnicities and different countries. And so it was really unique and a really cool learning environment. But I was also like the blonde single girl and Mike was the blonde, white single guy.
Boy, yeah.
So they're like, what more needs to happen here? And Mike was on a trip with his youth group at the time. He was a youth leader. And so he wasn't there for the first week, whatever. So I just got to settle in.
Who is this Mike?
I don't even know who this Mike is. And then I was walking outside one day and I was like, there he is. Cause he's the white blonde guy. Yeah. And he was like, why, hello. And I was like, why, hello. And we talked for a few minutes and I walked away and I said, that guy's totally not my type. Totally not my type. He had on these super short running shorts. So short. I threw them away several times and they have managed to come out of the trash can every single time. Sorry, Mike.
Man.
But he knows. They were highlighter. Anyways, all the things. There's no way. And I could tell he was just really smart, and even the questions he was asking and talking about his classes. Really, and I was like, okay, this guy's very smart. But we started just naturally crossing paths. We would have community dinners or different things. And then he started asking me to like do things more regularly, like go for walks. Yes.
Mike.
I know. So I was like, okay, what is it, with this guy? And we ended up going for he'd said, there's this really pretty lake nearby. Would you be up for going? That was my first time like leaving the student housing with him. So I get in his car, and he had to hot wire his car.
No
It didn't
way.
have an ignition. It was like a, who knows how old Ford Taurus, that he had to like put the wires together to get it to start. I was like, wow.
What is happening?
What is happening? And he was like, oh yeah, I had to rewire it. And okay. So that was funny.
I love this.
Yes, right. Yeah, you get the like 24-year-old Mike.
Oh man.
Yes, in this very old car. But we did end up going for a walk around this really beautiful lake. And I just remember him saying, like, tell me your story. And I thought to myself, wow, you really want to go there? Because I have a very complex story. And but I was like, well, I guess now or never. And so I just kind of shared everything and was expecting him to say, all right, let's head to the car. Let's make this thing be done.
Yeah.
But I had the very opposite reaction. He was so gracious and just saying like, wow, it's so cool to see how God is redeeming your story and has redeemed your story. And what a privilege. Thank you for sharing it with me. And I was like, okay.
This is different.
Okay. And then we went out to dinner afterwards. And at the dinner, though, he said, I would never date anyone who lives in student housing. Because what if we break up? Like, or what if what if it doesn't work out? You end up
it's gonna be awkward.
Yes, you're gonna see this person all the time. And I thought, this guy thinks I'm into him, and I'm not quite there yet. And so I said, I also would not date anyone in student housing because that would be really awkward. I would never do that. And I remember, I talked to my mom often on the phone and usually every day. And so she would get these like up to speed comments about Mike. And I'm like, he's not my type. There's no way I would ever. And she saw the progression over the course of like, well, I don't know, maybe there's something. Yes. And so I think it was about a week and a half from that dinner. And Mike made the proclamation that he would never date anyone from student housing. He asked me on another walk. And so I went, and he said, do you remember when I told you I would never date anyone from student housing? Yes. I would like to change my mind. Will you be my girlfriend? And I said, I will.
How did you feel in that moment?
I think
going from like, not my type, and he said that.
I'm a fairly good reader of people. And so even over the course of the week, it was only a week, right? But I was like, the temperature is changing here. So, and now that I know Mike, obviously this was 20 years ago. He's very logical, but then he also has feelings. And so I could tell it was this war going on. My head says this, my heart says this. What do I do?
Oh, Mike.
Yes. So that was middle end of September. And then he drove to Michigan with me in October to meet my parents. So things were moving pretty steadily along. And then he proposed right before Christmas.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay, he was on a mission.
He was. I think I also was like, I don't want to be messed with. I've been through a lot of really hard relationships. And I had a lot of conversations with him of like, don't like mess with me, please. Emotionally.
Yes,
like I am not there.
I'm not doing this
I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
And so I think that helped. He's, as you know, fairly indecisive. And so sometimes he needs a little, prompting. And so I think I was also like, I'm not going to just wait around for you to make up your mind what you want to do here. So that kept the pace pretty quick. And so we got engaged right before Christmas and then married in February. So we had a 6-week engagement. So, and part of the reasoning behind that is there was a married housing apartment that was opening up because a couple was moving.
Smart
and
move.
It was amazing. It had cathedral ceilings and a fireplace. I mean, it was not your average student housing. And so Mike and I talked about it, and he was like, I really like that apartment. I said, I know, me too, but that would mean we'd have to get married in 6 weeks. Yeah. And he was like, all right, that sounds good. So,
whoa.
Yes.
How did your parents feel about that?
After
you sharing with your mom, I don't know if this is the guy. He's not my type. Yeah.
My mom and dad met and married in 5.5 months. So they were like, woo,
Nice.
do it, right? Like, this is great.
Green light,
and
go.
My dad, he said, it's been so interesting watching your journey of boyfriends over the years. He said, you know, we could tell as you were getting older and maturing, you started making better bad choices. I was like, well, thanks. They were still bad choices, but they were better. So Mike was the first Christian that I dated. And so I think they were like, this is
Huge improvement.
we're good, right? This is a huge improvement. Let's do it. So they were really supportive.
Wow.
Yeah.
is awesome.
Mike's parents struggled a little bit more.
Yeah.
They didn't know me, and
Right.
that's valid.
That's fair.
It's fair.
Yeah.
Now that our kids are getting older.
I mean, I was just going to say, now that you're
Yes.
thinking of like, you know, Jonathan being the one closest to that, you go, oh, I
Yeah,
don't
like,
know.
wait a second. I need a little more time here to make sure I approve, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we've had to, you know, navigate
Mm-hmm.
just that and learning new families and
Wow.
all of that. But yeah, so it will be 20 years for us in February.
Praise the Lord.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of fiery moments in that, as there is. And I feel like as part of the sharpening process.
Yes.
We were married for a few years before we started having kids, and that was really helpful just to have some time. Mike really wanted to be done with seminary before we had kids. And so he graduated in May of, I don't even remember what year.
He graduated.
He graduated somewhere. Oh, I guess, well, it was the year Jonathan was born. So 2008. So he graduated in May and Jonathan was born in July. So he was able to squeak through seminary and get it done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we were living in South Florida at the time. Mike had a ministry job there full time.
That's right.
And then he started talking. That's where we started talking about church planting. And I really did not know anything about church planting. I had very
So
limited.
intimidating.
Yes. At that point, I mean, I had been a Christian for four years probably. And so I didn't know anything like, why don't you just join a church? Or, you know, I didn't understand all of the reasoning behind church planting. But the more that he explained it to me, and he was so passionate about it, and I could tell, I was like, God, you've given him this desire. And so let's pursue it and see what happens.
Wow.
Yeah. So he applied.
What a statement of faith right there.
Yeah. I was like, well, I like adventure. I like trying things. What's there to lose, you know?
Yeah, let's plant the church. Why not?
Right. Yes. In hindsight, I'm like, it was naive. And
Oh, man.
But that's
But
usually
so
where
much
we
fruit, though.
start. Yes.
Like you look back, I just think of like that situation. Oh, there's so much I want to say, but I'll stick to that. Like you look back at now the over 10 years of Redemption City church history.
Yeah.
And you see all the fruit and all the good that has come out of that. And you go, man, maybe we didn't know and it was intimidating, but here is what it looks like to listen to the voice of the Lord and say, all right, you lead the way, we'll follow. And now you look at all the beautiful, I mean, and this 10 years is a long time. But then you think, well, what about the next 10 that are to come? And you go,
Right.
oh, man, I can't wait to see.
For
right?
sure.
And so
Yes.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool in the sense. I remember somebody saying, if God were to tell us everything that was on the path before us, we would be scared of the hard things, but we also wouldn't believe that the good things would be as beautiful as they are, you know? And so I think of that. Like, I didn't know, but I was willing to say yes. And so Mike applied for a church planting residency program in Minneapolis.
That's right.
So we went there for a year. And in that process, we had to discern where we wanted, where we were going to plant a church. Mike.
Michigan, huh?
Right. I know. By this point, we were pregnant with our third, with Ben. And I really knew I needed help. I would need help. They were all really little. All of our kids are about a year and a half apart. And so I remember saying, if we're going to church plant, I know I'm going to need a lot of support because this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
Mike wanted to do the East Coast. He's always been drawn to the East Coast. There's mountains not super
I
far.
wouldn't blame
I
him.
know, right? There's all these like, you know, secular cities that were intriguing to him. And he pursued some options, but nothing really opened up for him there. And I remember feeling conflicted about that of like, what do I do with this? I want to have open hands if God wants us on the East Coast. And just remember one morning waking up early with one of our kids and being reminded that no matter where we are, God's presence is there. And it's out of a psalm, but it's, if I rest on the far side of the sea, you know, if I go to the depths, right, you are there. And that was a comfort. I was like, if it's the East Coast, God, you will be anywhere we go. God is there and will sustain us.
Yeah.
And so at that point I had surrendered, like, wherever you want us to go, Lord.
Yeah.
Mike, like I said, pursued things on the East Coast with friends and connections he had there, but it didn't really go anywhere.
Took off,
Yeah. And so we were coming to Grand Rapids to visit my parents, and he was like, I'll just see. I'll follow some trails and see if it goes anywhere. I know some people to connect with. And I was like, okay. He was more doing it like, then Jamie will know that, I can just get her off, she doesn't have to bring it up anymore. And in that is when he met Rod Van Salkema, who's the pastor at Crossroads. Yeah. And he came back from that like pale, so white, and looked very like he had seen a ghost. And I was like, what happened? Did it go terribly? And he was like, no, I think this is where we're supposed to move. Yes. I was like,
terrified.
Yes. He was like, really, God, the Midwest?
Oh, man.
It's flat. There's no mountains to ski. And so he had such a good meeting with Rod, and Rod was super encouraging to Mike and just saying, we would love to have another gospel centered partner here work,
awesome.
So spend a year with us at Crossroads as you get your bearings on the city, and we'll support you in whatever ways that we can. And so that was huge to have another pastor just say, come. Because Mike's like, maybe the city has enough, churches, right? Because there are a lot. But as Rod explained, he's like, there are a lot, but what you're going for, and, we need more.
And we've seen the testament of that
right.
over and over.
For sure. Yeah. So we moved, and then we moved in the summer of 2012. And I remember because Ben was born 6 weeks later, we bought a house, we moved in, and then we had Ben.
A lot of newness.
Yes. And I was really thankful to be by my parents with that, and just the demands of all of the meetings and networking that comes with church planting. It was really nice to have some help and support in that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. And so now you guys are here.
Yeah.
It's been 10 years since you guys planted.
It's been, It's been 13 since we moved.
Okay.
And so we did spend that first year at Crossroads, which was really huge for us. And so I think we're on year 12 for Redemption City. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. So
if nothing, I just think, right, like we sing like the song, like great is thy faithfulness. And we're like, God is faithful. Yes and amen. But how you come to know that to be true is when you look at the past and you see how God has been faithful. And you think now, like, man, it was intimidating when the conversation was happening. And now we have celebrated like the 12th anniversary of Redemption City as a church.
Right.
And so you go, wow.
God is
good. Yes. I can trust you. I think I can trust you.
Right. It's that we go back and forth. Like, we trust you. Can we trust you? Are you trustworthy in this next season?
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is natural for us, right? Like when
prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, right?
Amen.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, that is. I have known you for a few years now, but for some reason I didn't know your testimony, and so the things that you've shared, like, wow, like it's so encouraging for me to see and know how the Lord has worked in your heart, and I more reasons to say that I'm so glad that Meredith and I have partnered with Mike and you in gospel ministry, because I go like, oh man, like what an amazing group of people to learn from.
Well, isn't it so interesting too, right? Of like, we go to church with people and we can see where they are and think, wow, they, are mature in their faith, but we don't understand all of the steps that have, brought people to a certain place.
Yeah.
And so I'm thankful for the journey that I've been on with God and with Mike and with our church and with you and Meredith. And it's been a blessing.
Oh, man. Yeah, there's one thing that you said when you were sharing your testimony that caught my attention, when you mentioned that things kind of started to go wrong, complications, the breakup, when you found out about your cervical cancer. And when you were explaining that, I was relating to you in a different way, but like kind of like processing, and I was thinking like, man, it seems like to me like God has a very unique way to get a hold of our attention.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because like one illustration that I like to say a lot, and think of like even my life when the Lord really got a hold of my heart, because I can share my testimony later,
Right.
but I did walk away from the faith, and I was like, this is hypocrisy. I don't want it. And then the Lord basically, in a very gentle way, but very very gentle, he just said, "You're mine, come back." And when he did that was in probably one of the darkest seasons of my life. One of, not the darkest,
Sure.
or maybe the darkest, like one
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
But I understood in that moment that, one, the Lord wanted me. The Lord was on a mission to get me, and the Lord was not going to fail in getting me. But in that moment, I remember wondering, like, but why is everything going wrong?
Right.
Like, talk about relationship. Like, I thought I was going to marry this girl too. And we ended up breaking up. And I was like devastated. I was like, God, why are you taking her away from me? Right. And then job, like, oh, this is going really bad now and I can't be here anymore. Education, I'm about to finish community college. I wanted to transfer and now I can't because I don't have money. I don't have a job. Like, and everything just like I'm like, what is happening? And then I understood that sometimes God places us in dark places to see him with clarity. And I like to say, for example, like when we want to see the stars, we don't go to the city where there's lights and distractions, but we go to the darkest place we can find in the country where we go, there's no distractions. Everything's dark. I can just look and see with clarity and appreciate and like get to know the stars for what they actually are.
For sure.
And in the same way I go, that's how I got to know God for who he actually is and not who I thought he was. Right. And so as you were saying that, I go, oh man, I think that that's applicable for all of us in different seasons of life. And that kind of leads me to maybe the greater topic of our conversation.
Sure.
With, I think with this statement everyone can relate to, we go through very hard seasons of life on this side of glory. And sometimes it's natural for us to wonder, like, why? What's happening? Lord, where are you? And where am I? And like, is this a dream? Like what? Right? As we consider all that, I have experienced a lot of things with the loss of my sister that we'll get to talk about. But I would like to, if it's okay with you, hear from you, knowing that you are in the process of grieving. I don't know if you want to share what happened or just be generalized or very general about it.
For sure.
And not enough details, but if you want to go right into like the grieving,
here we are.
What is
for
or
sure.
if you want to give some context, totally up to you.
Sure.
But I would like to maybe hear from you as to like what that has been like for you.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting, even as you were talking about, seeing God as he truly is. And, we can think the Christian life is up and to the right. Like everything's going to
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes. Wouldn't it be nice to just have this straight trajectory right up to heaven, right? And it's always going to get bigger and better. And Mike and I read the book. I can't remember the author, if it was Paul Miller, but it's called The J Curve. And it's actually about how we follow Christ into his death and resurrection. And that, it was several years ago that we read that, but it was helpful. It was a helpful paradigm shift for me. To give, I guess, some context to like navigating loss. A little over 10 years ago, Mike and I were pregnant. Mike was not pregnant. He was the cause of, anyways. I was pregnant.
We get it.
Right. Yes. I don't have to explain that.
Yeah.
I was pregnant and I went in for just a routine ultrasound. I was about halfway through the pregnancy and they couldn't find the baby's heartbeat. And they were like, don't worry. I'm sure it's our equipment or everything. And they did an ultrasound and our baby was not moving. And they're like, can we call your husband to come? Because I was alone. And I called him and I just said, Mike, you need to come. We need to figure out what next steps are, and our baby is not alive.
Oh.
And it was devastating. And we had to go through a delivery. We delivered, it was a little boy, our fifth little guy. And we named him Noah, because that was what we were going to name him. And that was a season of grieving for me, of grieving what could have been. Sometimes even now when I'm seeing our kids doing something cute, I'll think, there was another little boy that was supposed to be in that pile of wrestling that's taking place on the floor,
man.
you know? And so I had some context of grief and loss, but nothing like I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah.
So in June, at the end of June, I was with our boys. We were at a campground about a half an hour south of Grand Rapids, and I got a call from my dad. I'm really close to my parents. Increasingly over the years, I've just have a really sweet relationship with my mom and dad, and they've been a huge help with our kids and invested in them in a lot of ways. And so it was not irregular for my dad to call. We talked on the phone a lot,
Right.
and so I saw him call. I can even picture where I was at the campground. Sam was at soccer camp. Jonathan was working at the snack shack, selling snacks and stuff.
Yeah.
He would work there a few hours a summer or a few hours a week. And then Caleb and Ben were playing pickleball off to the side of where I was. I was sitting by the pool. And my dad called, and he just said, "Where are you?" And I was like, "Well, I'm at Sandy Pines." And he said, "Is Mike with you?" And I said, "No." And at that point, I was like, okay, something.
Yeah.
And he said, your mom was in a really bad accident, and she did not make it. And I remember I just fell to the ground. Nothing prepares you, right, for a moment like that.
Yeah.
And I just kept saying, what? And then just saying, no. And it took me a minute. My dad says I was like screaming, which I believe, because it's like those like guttural cries of like, I was just with her. I just saw her yesterday. I was supposed to see her tomorrow. Like, is this really happening? And then I got off the phone. I was like, I'm going to call you back, because I was like, I need Mike down here before I can totally lose it here, because I still am in charge of the kids.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And I called him. And later that night, he said, you said my name, and it brought me back to 10 years ago when you called me from that doctor's office. The tone of your voice was exactly the same. And he said, I knew as soon as you said my name,
something was wrong.
That something was wrong, because I went right back to 10 years ago in that when you called me from the doctor. And I told him, I said, my mom died in a car accident. I need you down here right now. And he was like, oh my gosh, okay. We were supposed to have community group in like an hour. It was one of those things, right? And so he came down, and we told the boys, and then it got harder. For sure. After that, I didn't know many details, and as I learned them, it was just horrible. And so it's just, it was really, really, you saw me the morning after. And it is one of the hardest thing I've ever experienced and walked through.
Yeah.
And
it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And I remember I had to go pick Sam up from that soccer camp, and I remember crying as I was going over there, but I also remember saying, Jesus, you know how this feels. Like it's this awareness of like, I remember Mike preached on this at different Easters of Jesus when he's at Lazarus' tomb, or he learns that Lazarus dies, and it's not just a weeping like this one little tear. It was this like from the gut anger at death and the chaos that it brings. And I was in that moment, even as I was unaware of a lot of things going on around me, I was very aware that Jesus knew how I felt. And that was a comfort, a small comfort, but and something in that moment for me just to hang on
Yeah.
to. Remember, like I'd said, when I was not a Christian, I didn't have handlebars.
Mm.
So when life was hard, I didn't even know how to process or think through things. And I was like, okay, this is a handlebar.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus knows how I feel. But
Man, it's when those things happen, it definitely makes you aware. You know how, like, I've heard this before from some people, especially. So when I was in college, I studied biology. I was doing pre-med, and we talk about life and death, right? And from a biological standpoint, a lot of people say, well, death is only natural.
yeah,
Things are meant to decay.
right.
Right?
That was one
it's
of my
the
family
process
members.
of life.
Yes. It's one of my family members' responses. Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
it is when you really get confronted with the reality of death that you really understand that that's not the way that things are meant to be.
Right.
Right? You feel the weight of it. It doesn't matter how many times you tell yourself, but it's the process of life. You go, no, like there's more
There's
than
something
this.
very wrong.
Yes, like this is not right. This is not normal. Things
Right.
are not the way that they're supposed to be.
For sure.
And I think it is then when you really get confronted with, like, then what is really the purpose? Like, what is all this? Is there any hope? Like, if death is the end
Right.
of all things, then what are we doing?
Yeah, for
What
sure.
is the meaning
What
of-
is the point of all of this?
Yeah, right. And so I remember having a lot of those conversations in undergrad. Like, but we should see it as something natural. You know, like babies are born. Old people normally die, and that's normal. And so part of that was still sort of like in the back of my mind
Sure.
up until the second year of seminary for me, when COVID just exploded, right? That my sister, who basically played a huge role in a maternal role for me in my formative years of being a teenager, probably the worst years.
To be involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so she took a lot of
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
That she ended up passing away because of it. That I, like, nothing that I learned in undergrad made sense of, like, no, this cannot be it. It like, there's more to this. And by this point, I was already, like, wrestling with, like, theological concepts of, like, the fall and all this. And I was like, how do I make sense of this? What does this mean? And why would this happen? How could God allow? And so I went through all those questions that I think we all go through probably continually in different seasons.
For sure.
Right? It's the same question addressed differently. And I'm like, what do I make of this? And how do I explain? Like, how do I explain to myself? And then how do I tell other people, like, hey, that's not the end of the story.
Right.
Where I go, is it not?
Yeah.
Yes, it's not. But how do I explain it? Like, how do I make sense of it? And I understood in that when my mom called me, and when I heard her cry and there were no words and she didn't need to tell me what it was, that I remember feeling sick to my stomach and, like, wanting to throw up and feeling like the room was just getting dark and, like, it was crushing me.
Yeah.
And I'm on the phone because it was COVID. I couldn't, like,
Right.
couldn't get out of the
be there.
States.
Yeah.
Couldn't be there. They're in Mexico and all this. And I go paralyzed, frozen, feeling like sweat cold. I'm like, this is not true. This is not real. And I'm hearing my mom just sob, like, weeping and like a scream that I wouldn't even know how to describe.
Right.
And I go, okay, if I don't make sense of this, I'm gonna be crushed.
Yeah, for
Sort of
sure.
like where do I run? Who do I go to? If normally the first thing that you would think like, well, I can go to my parents maybe. And I go,
Right.
my mom is coming to me for this.
Yeah.
And I have no,
Right.
like, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
And so, like, as you're explaining that, I go, like, death is not natural. Death is not something good. Death is an enemy, right? And death only points us to the reality that things are broken.
Right.
And so when we are faced with that, then I think the question is, what do we do with that, right? I don't think it's a matter of, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think statistics are pretty good on this. 100% of the people that are born die.
Yes.
You know?
No one has outlived it. Yeah,
Right.
I don't think.
And so
Yes.
you go, okay, so what do we do with it?
Right.
Right?
We will all encounter it in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how, I guess, to unpack that a little bit more, I'm interested to hear what the process was even 10 years ago and now is now.
Sure.
And maybe in a different way.
Yeah.
For you in the process of grieving. Like, I mean, I don't even know how to unpack this question, right? Like, what is the starting point? Like, what does that even look like other than fall to the floor and weep?
For sure. Which I did. Yeah. Which I did and do. And yeah, it was helpful for me to be 10 years past an initial, grieving loss experience to be aware that anxiety would soon follow. When our baby Noah died, I was very anxious that our other boys would die. Right. That something would happen to them, an accident, they would stop breathing, like all the things. I was very anxious. The worst of the worst. So this time when my mom died, I knew that I would need a lot of help processing. So I reached out to my counselor, who I've been meeting with as needed over the last few years. And I met with her within 2 weeks of my mom's accident. And she said to me, Jamie, the narrative that you put on this will determine the anxiety that you feel and the degree to which that anxiety controls you, or you learn to minimize, quiet its voice. And she's like, was God not able to stop this? Did he not care? Did he not care about your mom? She was like, go there, go there and be willing to wrestle with that. Who is God in this situation?
Which I think that's, I will say this. I think that's sometimes very hard to do because I feel like on top of that, you add a layer of self-brought condemnation. Like you bring, because it's easy to say, oh, but if I'm questioning God, am I sinning? Am I bad? Is this, can I do this? Right. And so what you're going through on top of that, you add this, like, you're condemning yourself because you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Am I sinning? Am I a bad person if I question God? If I have questions?
Right. I think for me in that, it was like, I couldn't deny that I had a lot of questions. And she said, give me a visual of how you're feeling right now. And I said, I am pounding God's chest with all of my unanswered questions. I want to know why. Like, why then? She was meeting a friend for lunch. It was random. Couldn't she have been 30 seconds later? Like all these things. And she was like, is he distant and uncaring? And is he powerless? Like, who is he? And that was a wrestling for me of like who he is. Ultimately, like, our theology is important in those moments. I'm an emotional person. I'm a heart forward person. But how we think and how we view God is so important in those moments.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, God, I will trust you with this. You could have stopped it. Yeah. And you didn't. God's not the cause of evil, but he can stop it. And so I remember hearing a phrase by an author. His name is Davy Blackburn, and he wrote the book Nothing is Wasted, which is amazing.
I'm familiar.
And he said, God doesn't give us the explanation. He gives us the incarnation. And I was like, yes, Like
Oh,
all the
man.
questions that I had the day of and the days after the accident, I still have.
Yeah.
Like, but I won't have answers on this side of eternity.
Yeah.
But I have the presence of God, and
Yeah.
I have the comfort that I will see my mom again,
Yes.
and she loved him and served him and obeyed him. And I remember saying to my boss at work, I was telling her the hardest part for me is that I pictured my mom, old lady, all of us around her, right? Like singing her into heaven. And I was like, I feel like that got taken from me. And she said, don't think for a second that your mom was alone. Yeah. She was not alone. Yeah. Jesus was right there. Yeah. Like he died a physical death so that he could be with us in death. And so it's all of these things that I've heard and really grasped onto of just Jesus died a physical death so that we are not alone in that moment. And the image of the accident was really hard. I didn't ever see pictures. Never will. But I know enough. And that was hard for me to get out of. And the woman that did my mom's funeral is the women's ministry director at their church. And she said to me, I was telling her that it was hard for me to get the image out of my head. And she said, you have to look to not what is seen, but what is unseen. Because what we see in that moment is tragedy. Yeah. But she's like, in the very second, your mom heard, well done, my good and faithful servant. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like I see death and destruction and chaos. Yeah. And yet she was welcomed into the presence of God in that very same moment. And so, oh man, all those truths.
I think, I think that we do lose sight of that. Yeah. Because when that happened to my sister, and even I can think back of like when my grandmother passed away, which it was rough for me because I couldn't be there at all. Yeah. Right. And so it was all like a phone call and didn't get to say my goodbyes or didn't get to see them one last time. Right. Like how I got to see them was when I went to Mexico and saw their tomb. Right. And so, and in those moments, it's easy to go or think like, oh, but all this. And I wish, of course, we wish that they were still here. And like, we talked about, right? Like death is not normal. Death is not natural. Death is not good. Right. But then it kind of like you come into like you realign your perspective on what has taken place and what the Lord is doing. And you think not on what we on this side of glory are experiencing, but you think of what they on the other side of glory are experiencing. Sure. Yeah. And all the promises that we're holding on to now are realized for them now. Right. And if I don't rejoice in that, as crazy as the sound, then I'm not really understanding the power and the beauty of the good news of Jesus and the gospel. Right?
Yeah. It's like God's way of saying, like, lift your eyes. Like, there's so much that happens that we are unaware of or don't give enough of our attention to. And the same women's ministry director who did my mom's funeral sent me a video of my mom. My mom was on a women's panel a few weeks before her accident. And my mom was saying someone asked, why do bad things happen? And my mom's answer to the question is we don't know always the answers of why God puts us through things. But we just have to walk right next to him as he leads us. And she's like, your mom said those words and you get like to hear your mom. Oh, man. And I was like, it's true. I think if she could say anything to me, it would be like, stay close to God. Like walk with him on this journey. That journey you didn't ask for. I've played that video a lot of just, these were my mom's words of comfort that I would need.
It's almost as if she was living into the reality of Psalm 23.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. And all of those things have been a huge help for me. I have not felt overly anxious about driving. Like
Right, because that could be a big
right,
challenge.
it could be a big challenge, and I have not had that. I've struggled with it a little bit, but not to the degree I was expecting. And I do think it's because of God's grace, but also that I'm like taking thoughts captive and reminding like God numbers our days.
Yeah.
And he knew, he is not surprised
Right.
by this. He knew this was how my mom would enter into his kingdom and eternity. And so she loved to drive and she loved to visit people, and we all talk about like, she did everything she would have wanted to do in the last couple weeks she and I spent a lot of time together. She spent a lot of time with our kids. She spent a lot of time with her friends. Her Bible study group,
doing panels,
right? She visited this friend that she had from high school. That's who she met for lunch that day. And she was doing everything she would have chosen to do, you know? And I think there's so much beauty in that she was still going outside of her comfort zone and challenging herself and in Bible studies. And she had just been to a funeral the day before her accident. And I saw her that afternoon. My parents have a pool, and so I brought the boys up there to swim. And she and I were talking, and she said, "Jamie, that funeral was so heavy because they didn't know the Lord, so they didn't have the hope." And she's like, "Make sure my funeral is not like that." And I was like, "Could we please not be having this conversation?" You know, you get cringy whenever anybody starts. Yeah. And I remember like twitching a little bit and being like, "Can we not talk about that right now?" Right. And she said, "I just want it to be a celebration. I will be in the presence of the Lord." And I mean, little did we know, 24 hours later, she would be in that accident. And I just think of those as what a gift of, she was even helping me reframe how I looked at her funeral. And
oh man, I just think of the Lord's providence in that.
Yeah. With
like her saying those words to you. And not only that, but having spoken into that panel and having that video of her saying like, "Hey, the Lord is walking with you."
Right.
Like a small gift of closure.
For sure.
You know, because I think, and like there's many times where we don't get any of that.
Right.
Like I think of my sister when COVID happened. We were like, not even my family who were there were able to go into the hospital to see her.
Right.
And how we got her after she passed away, she was bagged and we were not allowed to see her. And so there's a lot of that. But even that, right? Like I go back to like the gift of God's providence in that. Is like to have that reminder that your mom understood the reality that she was a part of.
Yeah.
And the reality that she would soon be a part of.
Right.
That we also join.
Yeah.
One day.
For sure.
Right. And so you go, if that is not comforting, then I don't know what else could be.
Right.
Because when you look around, when somebody who doesn't know the hope of the gospel, it's just like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just despair.
Yeah.
Like there's no, like,
right.
Where do you find hope?
For sure.
How do you make sense of what you just encounter? And so, yeah, I think that processing through this, the hardest part for me, I'll be honest, has been, and this, it's been a few years now since this happened with my sister. It didn't matter how many theology books I read. It didn't matter all the truth that I knew. I mean, it did matter, but at the moment it didn't feel like it.
For sure, yeah.
How many truths about God I would tell myself. Because there seemed to be a disconnection between what I knew to be true with what my heart was experiencing at the moment. Yeah. Right? Like that gap of waiting.
For sure.
Right? Like waiting for things to make sense. And I remember many times going, just like you explained, punning on God's chest, going to the Lord and bringing my questions. And I'm like, but the problem is not what I don't know. Right. So I don't need somebody to come and tell me what I already know. Right. And I think this is we'll make a little comment here.
Yeah.
When somebody's grieving, how can we help somebody who's grieving, right? Because we go, oh, well, they just need to know the gospel.
Right.
And you're like,
I will slap you across the face.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if we can be honest, sometimes we go like, I already know this.
Yeah.
I don't need you to tell me what I already know to be true.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense right now.
For sure.
Right? And so I found it so helpful and so refreshing when I experienced friends, Christian friends, that texted me, not a long passage, not a just, hey, I'm here for you and I'm praying for you.
Yeah.
And some friends that would go, we don't need to talk about it, but I'm here next to you.
For sure.
And I'm like, but okay. And like understanding as we encounter this gap of like, I know that God is good.
Yeah.
I know that He is sovereign. I know all these truths and I can read books about how to grieve properly and all that. But in the practical, when I'm caught in this, like, but what I know to be true doesn't translate into what I experience.
Yeah.
What do I do now? I found that being present was really valuable from others.
Right.
So maybe this could be an advice, right?
For sure.
But also me personally, you mentioned Davy Blackburn.
Yeah. Yep. You got it.
I've heard a couple of podcasts about him because that name familiar.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he explained, I think he was quoting someone else, and he explained like how we can get through grief is by going into war. And I remember hearing that, and I like going like,
who feels prepared for that?
Yeah, especially when, and I mean, after, I don't know if you've heard his story, but after hearing his story, you go, whoa, I mean, if he did it, like, whoa, you know?
Right.
But there was something about that I go, but what does that really look like?
Yeah.
You know? And so I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically that concept was like, you know, the memories that maybe trigger us to miss the person, or like, oh, like it could be, you know, oh, their favorite ice cream, right? Or, oh, the song, their favorite song or TV show, or like whatever, and makes us think of that. And we kind of have the tendency to
avoid.
That's too hurtful.
Yeah.
I want to avoid. His whole thing is like, no, actually step into that, right?
Yes. In his book, he fleshes it out a little bit more of, he phrases it, he uses another author that says, run towards the roar, like when it's loud like that. And I won't get into the whole detail, but he talks about how a lion hunts its prey, and anyways, and how the male lion roars so loud and the animal runs away and runs right into the trap. Whereas like the lion's just roaring. If he moved in that direction, he could have avoided, the prey could have avoided. And so he likens it to like when that happens, run towards the roar, the scary emotions, face them head on.
Yeah.
And it's the beauty of, right, like we're comforted by God's people, and we're comforted by God himself, his presence.
Yes.
And so like we can go through, and I have a lot of hard emotions, and I cry on a very regular basis, as my kids know. And that's just part of the process and part of the even healing and but I can relate to everything that you're saying of like, I need presence over answers right now.
Yes, because I don't think, okay, this is not necessarily all true. Sure. Because I was going to say, we don't need answers. No, I think we do need some answers still.
We need some stuff.
But the majority, I think we have knowledge of.
Yeah.
But is the practice, the formation that we go,
sure.
I know I should be going to God, but I'm not.
I'm a mess.
And I'm just like on the floor crying and, you know.
For sure.
And so with that in mind, I do want to ask you, and you don't have to, like, we can skip this question, but I want to ask you, like, as we consider what that looks like, do you feel like you started a process where you're like, oh, maybe this was my mom's favorite song? So I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Right, with my sister. When I did get to go visit my family, I was terrified of going to see her in the tomb. Yeah. I was like, I don't want to, because I don't know how I'm going to take it. There's so many things that I left unsaid. Yeah. And so many memories that I was longing to have still with my sister, that I knew that it wasn't the right time according to my own standard, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But, and so one of those things was actually going to see her tomb. And then another one was Christmas. She loved Christmas, especially with Mickey Mouse, all Mickey Mouse and Christmas, right? And there was a season where I would hear the songs that we would sing, and I'm like, I don't want to hear them. I would see Christmas lights that year specifically, and I'm like, I'm conflicted. Like, she loved Christmas, I loved Christmas, but it's hard.
How do you do it without her? Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so that concept makes a lot of sense to me. Like, push through that. And I'm wondering if, like, do you feel like you have engaged in that process, or like, I don't want to, like,
for sure
go into, but like,
I recognize that my margin to engage in that is different moment by moment. Sometimes I can look at pictures and be okay. Yesterday, my dad texted me one and I was a mess. I find it really depends. And I think it's okay to say, yes, I can't do that right now. Like, if I go down that, I'm not, it's going to take me a while to come out the other side. And I've been doing a group called Grief Share, which a lot of churches offer. It's a 13-week kind of course on grieving. That's been really helpful. I don't think it's not like a magic bullet but I'm like, you combine some content with that, with good community, with, I mean, I come to church Sunday mornings and I cry the whole, during worship the whole time. I'm like, but it's important that I work through these things and can come into the presence of God with my pain and say, I don't understand this.
That's so profound. Like, the
worship leader in you. You make me cry every week, Sebastian.
I'm just thinking, we have the invitation from the Lord to show up to a place where he's already shown up. Right. Like, he's there.
Right. I remember Mark Birkin one week in his sermon when he was transitioning into communion, he said, this reminds us that God went before us in death. And we come to this table because he went before us in death. Yeah. And some of those moments are so healing to me, right? To say, okay, I'm still in the thick of this. I'm in the messy middle. This is not all wrapped up for me. This is not, I've triumphed over the season of life. It's not that. I'm probably on night 4 of not being able to sleep. Oh, man. I still have those stretches of time where it's really hard. Yeah. And so I don't want to make it, seem like I'm at that, right? Yes, and right?
Yeah. It's and the reason why, like, I asked wasn't like, oh, like, are you there? No, right? But it's like to open the conversation to, like, yes, because it looks so different for everyone. Yeah. And what I realized is, like, I just gave examples, right? In like less than a minute, right? That took me over years,
right. To, like, right. What we can summarize is so, decades.
Like, it's a long process.
It's a long process, right?
And so it's not as easy as like, oh, okay, maybe I'm grieving right now, right? And tomorrow I'm gonna do this. Yeah. No, it's not. No. Yes. You might not, and you might not get to that until like 6 months or a whole year. Right. Like, but it's okay. Yes. Right. Like, it's more like the principle of, like, the Lord is ready to meet you, and he has showed up.
For sure.
Right. Yeah. And so it's more like the invitation to do that.
Right. Yeah. I've heard it called like rhythms of receiving, even like good. Prayer or reading scripture. It's like these rhythms where we open our hands and say, God, I've got nothing. I mean, my prayer life in this season has been literally like, lead me on, has been my refrain. Yes. Lord, lead me on. And that's okay. I'm not in a place where I can do really long, eloquent prayers right now. I'm tender and I'm in a lot of pain. Yeah. And so I think it's okay to like just have these seasons where all I can utter right now is, kind of like, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner,
and like the comforting part about that, right? It's not bad that we don't have the words. Right. Because Paul reminds us that the Spirit is the one who's groaning
Yes.
when we don't have the right words to say or we don't
Yeah.
even know what to pray for.
Right.
Right. And so the fact that you know that not only like as we have doubts, as we are angry at God, I
Yeah.
think if I'm honest,
Yeah.
like when you experience such a tragedy like that,
Yeah.
it is only normal for us to go and say like,
Right.
what?
Right. It's also acknowledging his ultimate control.
Right,
Right.
right.
You're like
Why would you?
You are in control over all
Yeah.
things. It's like this, give and take. Like we're
Yes.
coming to you angry because we actually believe that you exist
Oh, that's a good point.
and believe that you have
And
power
that you do
over
have
this.
that control.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it's
Oh.
this like, you have this power and authority, and I bow at your feet and just say, you are writing a story that I do not like right
Yes.
now.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
but
And even in that, like the comfort is one, the Holy Spirit intercedes on our behalf.
right.
And groans with groanings. Like that
Your
are
mom. Like your mom.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
dad says he's like, now I know what that groaning sounds like because he heard
Oh,
me do
man.
it. Right.
Yes.
It's like these from the deepest parts of our being groans. And that is how the Spirit intercedes for us.
Yeah.
Right. From the deepest parts.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
so you have that assurance now that we've been sealed with the Holy Spirit and it has been promised. It guarantees us and groans for us,
Yeah.
with us and prays for us. And then you look at the beautiful picture of the Trinity because now also Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father,
Right.
the one to whom we have been united in his death and his resurrection. So we have new life, intercedes actively on our behalf for us, reminding us that the story's not done.
Right.
Right? Like he's still redeeming and restoring
For
everything that
sure.
has been broken by the fall.
Yeah, it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
I have an older brother. He's 3 years older than me. He lives in Mississippi. He's married. He has, this will make sense in a minute.
Yeah.
He has 2 kids. Both have autism. His son is 14 and his autism is so advanced that he has to be in a full-time residential facility. And my mom, that weighed really heavy on my mom. She was always really sad. Just that she couldn't be with him and interact with him like she wanted to, right? He was in this facility in Mississippi. She would send him boxes every couple weeks of new pajamas and new socks and all the things that a grandma, would do. Little cards and stickers and autism toys and different things. And she prayed for him a lot. And my brother went to tell him, he's probably cognitively about a 2-year-old, mostly nonverbal.
Okay.
So you really don't even know how much he's able to get and understand. But my brother's like, I should at least tell him that she died. I don't know that he'll understand, but maybe if he stops getting packages, he'll at least know, you know?
Like what changed?
Yes. Yeah. So my brother and sister-in-law went to visit him and sat him down. And they said, Ezekiel, we want you to know something. And he said, Granny is in heaven. And they just looked at him because he hardly ever says coherent full sentences like that.
Whoa.
And they said, yeah, how did you know? And he said, she came and told me.
Whoa.
And they were like, what my brother called me, he was sobbing. Because he's like, I just want you to know what just happened. This is what Ezekiel said. And he wouldn't have the wherewithal to make that up. And so I'm like, it would make a lot of sense. He weighed really heavy on her heart. I don't know how the spiritual world works. And, not here to say all the things we hear are true, right? But I was like, that to us,
It makes you think.
It makes you think, right? Of there's so much that we don't see. And yet we know that God is active in all of that. And so, but we've even said that he would comfort Ezekiel, who's in this full-time facility. That in some way that was a comfort to Ezekiel, and he knew.
Yeah. And
so nobody had told him, and we were like, okay, God, you do comfort your people.
Yeah. I mean,
And we're grateful.
2 Corinthians, I believe Paul says, God is the God of all comfort.
Yeah.
And he has comforted us so that we can also comfort one another.
Others. Yeah.
But it doesn't the big point is God is the one who is the God of all comfort.
Right.
Right. And so even in those moments where we may not experience it immediately,
Yeah.
it's not so much that like, oh, we don't experience it now because God is not comforting us now. But it's more like, no, he's comforting us now.
Yeah.
I'm just not like, is that like, what am I telling myself? Right. Like, how am I allowing my emotions to dictate my actions? Right. Where it should be what I know to be true should dictate how I feel.
And
right.
Yeah,
and so like all that is like huge.
Right.
Like
reframing. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think of another thing that I do want to mention as we kind of like wrap up with like this conversation with, I think it would be good to maybe even have like a second part.
Yeah.
That because there's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really that I really like rocked my world when I experienced this was like I had to believe that, you know, our purpose as Christians is to be here, labor for the gospel, and then that, you know, the time would come where we would depart from this earth and then go home and we like in heaven. Although true, I understood quickly when I was faced with the loss of my sister that like heaven, this could be controversial, heaven is not the ultimate destination because it's not good enough for me to think that my sister is spiritually there. Right. Like I want to hug.
Right. I want a physical body.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes we forget that that's what is promised to us, which just makes like the gospel so supernatural.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about a death coming back to life. Jesus' resurrection that is promised to us.
Yeah.
To have a perfected body as he does.
Right.
So you understand, okay, even then, because sometimes it brings great comfort and it's true. Like my sister's in heaven. My sister's before the presence of the Lord. Yes and amen. True.
Yeah.
But the day is going to come where I will get to hug her.
Yeah.
And I will feel her embrace.
Right.
And we will like all the tears, all the pain, all the sorrow will have an ultimate answer because although now we don't see fully, but then we will, everything will make sense and we'll rejoice before the presence of the Lord as we feel each other's embrace and say, it was so worth it.
Right.
And so like the hope in the resurrection truly makes sense when you're faced with the loss of a loved one.
Right.
At least that's what I like. It just hit me like a train because I went, yes, but there's more.
Yeah.
Like there has to be more.
They're physical, right? Our physical bodies are important in the sense that like we will be in bodies, new resurrected bodies. And similar to you, I didn't get to see my mom because of the nature of the accident. I didn't ever get to see her. And I just remember thinking my last memory of her, she was very much alive. And that will be what it is the next time I see her. Yeah. Very much alive.
Yeah. Very much alive.
Yeah. We made a little, stone for her, gravesite, and it just says she's more alive now than ever.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that's the hope. And that one day we will all be
true life, like real everlasting life. Yeah.
Yes. And this is, as much as I won't ever say I'm thankful that she died or how she died, right? But I can thank God for what he's producing in me, right? Like I wrote it down so I wouldn't say it wrong. But the 2 Corinthians, for this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen, right? It's like, it's producing something in us and this hunger for what is to come. And I can be thankful for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm there with you. And I just want to thank you. Seriously, Jamie, I know that this is a very sensitive topic and even if anything, also want to encourage you. We talked about like stepping into the roar, right? And like tackle it. And I think this is a part of it. Like I could be wrong, but I just want to encourage you. And another thing is the importance of community, which I think you also have realized. I don't think I would have been able to walk through what I walked through during COVID, losing my sister, if it wasn't for the church family that I was a part of at that moment, which I wasn't here at Redemption City for the season, but the crazy thing is, you guys were still there for me. I still remember the text from many of our members just checking in, like, Sebastian, we're here for you, and we're praying, and even like
it's the body of Christ, right? Regardless of like what church we're a part of, it's those are the moments where the body rallies, because I think it's a wake up call for all of us. And
I think this is beautiful to see what that looks like. The words of Paul in Romans 12, where he clearly says, "Weep with those who weep," and you go, I've seen it, and I've experienced it, and so, Jamie, I just seriously want to say thank you so much, and like, I think that it would be good for us to maybe consider like another episode about this, because there's so many questions, and maybe for those who are watching, that they might have questions because they're going through it, right? Like, sometimes the Lord allows us to go, just like Christ went before us. Right. Sometimes he allows us to go into that, so that those who follow and are to come go like, how did you? Yes. And I go, I don't know, but let me just share what I experienced.
I connected with Ken and Rhonda right away, because they both lost their moms in the last year. And so I was like, hey, you're a few steps ahead of me on this road that none of us don't want to be on, but yet here we are. And that was a huge comfort. Yes. And so it's like we all are on different journeys, but we can learn from each other and be comforted by each other. Can I close with one thing?
Yes, please. I would love that.
This is an excerpt from Every Moment Holy, and I got a lot of cards after my mom's death, which were super sweet. Gina Bose wrote this excerpt and a card for me, and I read it a lot. And it's a prayer, obviously, from Every Moment Holy, but this is part of it. It says, God, grant us courage to shrink neither from the aches nor from the joy that love brings. For each willingly received will accomplish the good works you have appointed them to do. Therefore, we praise you even for our sadness. Knowing the sorrows we steward in this life will in time be redeemed. And I just really loved that, of the sorrows we steward will be redeemed. Like, God wastes nothing. Davy Blackburn again, his book, Nothing is Wasted.
Nothing is wasted.
Yeah, that he will use all of this to bring redemption in his ways.
And that, it's a journey that we cannot, one, we cannot walk by ourselves. 2, we're not meant to walk by ourselves. And 3, we're reminded that the Holy Spirit is with us in that. And so, thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Jamie. And I want to say, for those of you who are listening still, I just want to say thank you for sharing your time. This was a really important conversation that I believe we should learn how to navigate through, especially the topic of grief and lament, and how do we make sense of these things in light of the gospel. If you are going through that, I just want to say you are not alone in this. You're not meant to walk alone through this, and we are here for you. I would love to hear your questions or thoughts about it. If you want to connect, even like it could be me or Jamie as well. But I just want to say thank you for your time, and we're really going to consider about making a second episode here, because there's so many other things that I want to touch on, but our time is up. And so I just want to say thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.